I love what I do because leadership is really about personal development and how leaders show up. One of my favorite studies was a longitudinal study of over 10,000 engineers. This was done at University of Chicago with participation from Stanford and Harvard. And they tracked these engineers to see which of these engineers were really successful over this 10 plus years and which ones weren't so successful. And the ones who were successful, well, what were they doing that their success was attributed to? And so it was really interesting because technical expertise or their knowledge of engineering, I always ask people, like, what percentage of their future success do you think was attributable to their know-how or their technical expertise? And it's only 14%. So, think about it. Let's suppose you're an aeronautical engineer. If you don't have really strong technical expertise and you make a mistake in the cockpit, the plane might crash. So it's pretty important for engineers to have that strong knowledge and of how engineering works, whether they're civil engineer, electrical, whichever. And so the other 85+% of the success of these engineers was attributable to only two things. Number one, personal character. Number two, socio-emotional abilities. This guy I was coaching was working on this project he was really excited about. He'd been working on it for 6 months. So Steve comes into his kind of cubicle in this open space office, and in front of a few hundred people says, "This is crap, stop working on it," and then walks away. So this guy was completely humiliated, and yet he stayed at Apple another 6 years. So I asked him, like, well, why did you stay there after that kind of public humiliation? And his response has always stayed with me. He said, Steve wasn't the best with relationships or emotional intelligence, but there's no one in the industry I could have learned more from than Steve. The people who sometimes are the most stressed out are those who are new to an organization and they're the most tethered to their phones. They have the least work-life balance because they feel like, hey, I need to reply to every email and every text as quickly as possible. WhatsApp has become the new email in many organizations. So maybe they're tethered to their phones, checking those WhatsApps evenings and weekends because they want to really prove themselves. Whereas people who have risen in an organization and are higher status, often a little more relaxed about it. Like, well, okay, I can reply tomorrow morning and I'm not going to feel like it's Armageddon because people no longer see me as the go-to person.
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with how safe you feel as well, isn't it? I think when you're new to an organization, you're still always going to have that sort of nagging feeling for a long time about, if I don't do this, they might see through me, get rid of me, they might not be happy with my performance. I better do as much as I possibly can. Whereas once you've been around a little while, that naturally goes away, doesn't it? The longer you're there without getting the sack, the safer you feel. And so it's easier to set boundaries, I think, at that stage.
I think you're right. So, there's been the whole like Sheryl Sandberg, like lean in movement, and that, women should assume leadership roles and really lean into the norms of work. Well, what I've observed in all of my studies and interviews is that it's actually the opposite has happened. Women are leaning out more. They're like, you know what? These norms in organizations are so male dominant, where guys are willing to work these extreme hours and really devaluing themselves and their families. And that just doesn't work for most women. And there's a recent study, it's interesting, finding that women tend to leave organizations because they feel lonely in the organization. And why do they feel lonely? Because they feel inauthentic. They feel like the norms of the organization are not their norms. And I think a part of that is that sociality versus intimacy distinction, that organizations are valuing people often for really putting in, pedal to the metal, extra hours, and rising to a high status role that way. Whereas people who are really developing close relationships with others, but not necessarily wanting to work these 80, 100-hour weeks, are not as valued. They did a longitudinal study, and they found that, like, they're basically looking at the pay gap between men and women, and the male and female drivers of all their conveyances. And what they found was that if the couple did not have children, there was zero pay difference over time. There was no pay gap at all. But if they had children, then the pay gap started to widen and widen further and further. So what happened was, when a couple had a child, the woman would now start to work less, because now here's where the societal expectations come in, because she felt compelled to take on more housework, more childcare. There's the invisible cognitive load, with all of the unnoticed, unappreciated activities and responsibilities that women predominantly women have to engage in, or choose to engage in it sometimes, but often because they feel compelled to engage in because the man's not doing them.